Hi, I'm Gareth Kane, and welcome to the Net Zero Business Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by David Kipling, Chief Executive Officer at On-Site Energy Group. Welcome to the podcast, David.
Thanks, Gareth.
Well, we'll dig into what On-Site Energy Group do in a second, but we always like to ask our guests, how did you first get started in clean energy?
On the rebound from from leaving a job in real estate, actually. I end up going back to my roots in corporate finance and discovered clean energy. I was offered some jobs in the position in that area, and got into it that way. Actually, suddenly realised at that time there was a dearth of knowledge about actually how to structure clean energy deals and all the acronyms and how to do things, and then eventually that moved into and it's sort of a role where I was trying to find disruptive energy technologies as energy decentralizing. So I've been doing it now for about 17 years in the clean energy space and energy efficiency space.
Yeah, that's interesting. You came at it from the financial and sort of contractual point of view rather than sort of
Yeah.
technology. You weren't running power plants in your past.
No. I'm an accountant becoming an engineer quickly.
So, the on-site energy, I think, passes the Ronseal test. It does what
Yes.
it says in the tin, but on a practical basis, what do you do?
Uh, Pretty much exactly that, as it says. We basically we only work with energy intensive manufacturers to start with. And basically, and this is based on my previous role and a lot of our team's experience. We've actually come from working in food manufacturers and electronics manufacturers and other manufacturers in facilities management or say in the energy sector as well. And basically, what we do is we understand how a business consumes energy now. So how much of it, what times a day, what seasonality is there to it, and also where does that energy go? Sort of what's it being used on? What sort of conditions is it being used to create, if it's climate or for steam or whatever it may be. And then fundamentally, we look at for alternative technologies or solution sets to achieve the same outcomes, but with lower cost and carbon.
Yeah.
And so we come up with generally a concept of how we could save significant money for the customer through the deployment of behind the meter, either efficiency or generation, and lay out a number of options for us to do that, either with the customer paying for it capex, or for us funding it and delivering it under a PPA model. So we tend to be very transparent. We set out a lot of our logic all the time about why we've considered certain technologies over others and how we've sized them and how we've intermingled them and so on to optimize them. So what we aren't is we're not trying to sell a particular target of the number of solar PV panels that month or a number of batteries. We just look at the right solution because fundamentally we're getting into bed with that customer for 10 years or whatever it may be when they sign an agreement with us. So it has to be right and balanced from the outset and not skewed to a particular other purpose. Otherwise, that relationship quickly falls apart.
Yeah, if I could pick up on just a couple of things there to expand on. Behind the meter is a phrase you hear increasingly often these days.
Yeah.
What does it mean in practice?
So every factory has a meter between it and the grid.
Mhm.
And most factories just take power from the grid and they pay for the kilowatts they've received from the grid. And that remains the same under this model. But behind the meter means that we actually connect a solar PV or CHP generation or whatever it may be into the customer's own switchgear. And so it means then the power that's produced inside the factory stays within the factory unless we produce more of it than the factory needs, in which case electricity will want to go somewhere and it tries to go through the meter onto the grid, basically. So that's when you would export.
Yeah.
And the big benefit of producing behind the meter is that when you import power from the grid, probably about between 30 and 60% of the cost of that energy is through variable grid transmission charges that you only pay when the kilowatts go into the factory.
Yeah.
So it means you instantly avoided 30 to 60% of your energy bill by
Yeah.
producing, even though your kilowatts haven't changed, because you're producing them and the grid isn't, you've saved that amount of money. And the other benefits of behind the meter generation is typically you get to access the full benefits of the system. So if the system produces heat, instead of it dissipating like in gas CGGTs or something on the grid, effectively you can use that heat locally. So it's much more efficient. You can often use the heat to offset other fossil fuel consumption, and that's what we do. We try to optimize the usage of all the different heat sources and generation sources on site.
Yeah. So I was just wondering if, as well as transmission charges, um, do you, does the client have to pay the so-called policy charges
So
part of the bills?
those are the principal ones they avoid.
Yeah.
So really, what they're left with paying with behind the meter is their fixed costs of being connected to the grid.
Yeah.
So their capacity charges and their any standing charges. But the policy costs like RO and FIT and CFDs are avoided basically by generating your own power behind the meter.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. And then a power purchase agreement, PPA, again,
Yeah,
another term that gets bandied about a lot.
yeah.
What is a PPA?
Oh, we have another phrase for it, which is ESA, which is an energy services agreement. But just to confuse matters, so fundamentally, a PPA is just an agreement between, say, us and our customer that we will provide kilowatts to them from the technology, and providing they have the demand to take the kilowatts, they'll take them
Yeah.
in priority to the grid. And what we do in the PPA is we set effectively a rate for that PPA price of electricity for the duration of the contract, basically. So we enter into a 10-year contract. Basically, the client knows what they're going to pay as a rate for the whole 10 years. There may be some variability if it's gas-based generation. Usually gas is a sort of pass-through cost, but actually then we fix our margin. So that's the only bit that's subject to indexation. And so it comes in a lot lower. Typically, the rate that we're charging under a PPA might be 75% of the rate from the grid.
Yeah.
So there's a significant saving there by doing it. And I say the PPA gives predictability. I mean, it also dictates things like ownership rights and obligations on each side, and the standards we have to hit in terms of availability and delivery of power quality and things like this. So it's a pretty balanced agreement just in terms of giving rights to each party, going, well, what do we need to do, and setting out the pricing structure between them as well, or between us. In our particular variation, we understand factories, their demand, they have good years and bad years. They make more sales one year than not in others, and their energy demand will go up and down accordingly. And we accept that and we flex with it. So in principle, our income goes up and down. It's one of the big differences between us and many others, because we don't have a set take and pay type clause. So the client's not paying for the amount of energy if they don't use it, which we think is pretty unfair. But equally, we have some mechanisms that basically keep that alignment of interest between us and the customer. So they have to recognise we're on site for their benefit as well, and they share some of the pain if we don't get as much income as well. So it's just a balanced agreement between two parties, really, to sort of supply energy. And potentially one of the key things is that the accounting rules sometimes can treat some of this as leases, in which case it goes onto the customer's balance sheet. We're pretty adept at structuring them so they stay off the customer's balance sheet.
Yeah.
So it's which again is maybe a bit of a USP for us. We've very successfully done that with all of our schemes to date, actually.
The deal making coming to the fore.
Perhaps a bit of creativity.
Yeah, and your website talks about zero capex commercial models. So you're basically providing the solar panels or CHP or whatever plant you're putting in, so the customer doesn't have to stump up for a major capex.
There's not a penny payable by the customer. The first penny they pay is for the first invoice we send them for electricity generation. and we pay for everything else. So whether it's foundations and civil works, or excavation or demolition, and integration into their site, or mechanical systems, or whatever it may be, we pay for it all. In to a specification we agree with the customer, I should stress, because we're not, they have to be happy that what we're installing meets their standards, and it's ultimately, often at the end of the PPA, at the end of the term, the customer has the option to acquire it. And so if they're going to acquire it, usually they want to be able to specify it at the outset in terms of what it is, and what it does, and where it connects to, and so on.
Yeah. So during the PPA itself, are you getting paid for exporting energy to the grid, or is it purely the energy you're selling to the customer on site?
So again, one of the big things that maybe differentiates us is that we generally size the scheme to meet the customer's demand only. And if we do export, it's really only for balancing reasons, or a bit of contingency. Often we don't even spill to the grid. So it's not our primary objective. Most of our goal is that most of our revenue, I mean, like 90% plus, comes from our customer. We think that's the creditworthiness of our customer is what drives us, and that's where we want to, how we base our business cases on, really.
Yeah. So what happens to the generation during, say a factory that only operating Monday to Friday? What happens to the weekend? Does that just do you have battery storage, or does that
generally, most factories do, if they tail off at the weekend, we just shape our generation to tail down to it,
right?
And if necessary, I mean, and maybe we export a bit more of the weekends, but it's for most of our sites we don't, because we don't think it's beneficial to do that. So but we generally have the right to do that if we want to, but I say generally we don't.
Yeah Interesting. And what is the market like then? It sounds like a great deal if you're saying we will come in, we'll install the kit, you don't have to pay any capex, and you get this, you get an instant reduction in your energy bills. Sounds like you're pushing an open door.
Quite often, once people understand it, they do. There's you often get many who sort of, sounds too good to be true type brigade. I mean, ultimately, we've done this successfully now. I think we've got about nearly 90 million pounds of business of assets which we own and operate, and we're keen to do more of it. It's a great way forward for businesses to fund new infrastructure or updated infrastructure. I think quite often when somebody builds a new factory, almost they get the money they need to build the factory and to kit it out with the new kit. But factories get old, and the infrastructure ages, and it gets outdated, and it needs updating. A PPA is a great way of updating it, where often there's a bit of a battle to get that capex out of the company because of payback criteria or whatever it may be at the time. So we're doing a number of systems. We've actually put in brand new heating systems inside buildings, and we drive big energy savings from that, and the customer inherits the building, the heating system at the end, or the BMS that's been installed, or we've had some real successes in that area. It's, saving like 40% of the heating bills, and same with solar arrays and so on. It's all the same type of story, really. It is a good way forward, actually, for a lot of businesses. And actually, bizarrely, a lot of companies go in, or people offering free capex, free solar or whatever it be. They're often pushing for longer PPA terms. Basically because it drives the lowest apparent cost of energy. But when you factor in indexation and the cost over the long period, it's often the case that it's in the customer's best interest to go for a shorter PPA. So we've done PPAs as short as 8 years, where the customer effectively stands into ownership of the asset after 8 years. We've made up the return we need, the customer doesn't make obviously as much savings in the 8 years as they would do under the 25.
Yeah.
But if you look at over the longer term, they make much more savings than actually going for the 25-year PPA.
Yeah. Because the energy effectively becomes free if once they've taken.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I mean, I'll give you an example. We've done a solar array last year. The customer's saving about, I think, 800, 900,000 a year whilst the PPA is going on. But once the PPA stops and it becomes the customers, they'll probably save 3.5 million a year.
Wow.
So it's a big step up for them. They're still making savings in the near term, and they're happy with that. But they're banking really a bigger saving when it comes into the ownership stage.
Yeah. And, we've been talking about it mainly in economic terms. Is that the main driver for the customers coming to you, cost savings, or is it carbon savings? Is it legislation?
Yeah.
What reasons are they knocking on your door?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's usually a combination of both. It's very rare we have somebody coming to us purely from an economic position. I think almost without exception, the schemes we put forward have some sort of beneficial environmental angle to them as well. And sometimes what we get involved with is customers who basically don't know quite their way forward from where they are. They've done the easy things from a ESG or SBTI targets perspective, but they're really a bit confused or don't have options to go further forward. Often we can get involved and we'll present a roadmap down towards their targets or below their targets, and offer a multi-stage solution where we can fund things along the way for them. And that might involve also things like electrification projects, but where the customer actually can't get enough electric from the grid, and or needs upgraded electrical infrastructure as a result of it. So we can help them with all those things as well in terms of planning and that. And I think that's I think we'll see that in the coming years, potentially either parts of factories or all of factories even moving off grid as they can't be satisfied with their requirements from the grid.
Yeah. Well, that's a very interesting point, because obviously there's a huge investment going in the grid at the minute to try and connect distributed renewables, and also we're going to have to upgrade a huge amount just for domestic heat pumps and electric vehicles as they become more common.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting concept, that this is sort of preempting almost that work rather than having to wait, because a grid connection at the minute can take years.
Yeah. We have a particular, and I don't think the problem is going to get solved within a decade. The reality is the grid's trying to solve too many big problems at once.
Yeah.
You've got the whole issue of electrification of the grid and the more renewables and storage going onto the grid. And that's a massive problem in its own right. To try and stabilize the grid while bringing all this offshore wind on board and solar on board and so on. You've got, exactly as you pointed out, you've got EVs, you've got domestic heat pumps trying to go onto the grid, creating more load onto the grid. You've got industry trying to electrify, in stages as well. And just to compound it all, you've got data centers trying to connect to the grid as well. So my personal view is it's too big a challenge to solve. So the grid would be far better saying, Mr. Data Centers, go and sort yourselves out with off-grid, off-site generation, or industry start looking at a bit of off-site generation whilst we sort out the infrastructure to be able to adopt you, and get ready to come back and connect back in mid 2030s or late 2030s or whatever it's going to be. Yeah. But until then, the big issue is, if businesses can't expand or they can't achieve their goals, they become less competitive, and it means then probably jobs will get lost and businesses may actually move offshore. And that's a real challenge, because you don't want to lose industry because of the grid constraints.
Yeah. Now, as we're recording this, we're hopefully emerging from I think it's the third or fourth fossil fuel crisis since the economic crisis in 2020. Do you find that the interest in these systems correlates with spikes in energy prices or international crisis we've seen. I know there's been a big investment in EV. A lot of people have gone out and bought EVs during the Strait of Hormuz crisis. But do you see that as a driver that people are saying, right, okay, now I'm going to make the change because I need some energy security as much as anything else?
Yeah, whether it's COVID or Ukraine or the latest one, crises have been good for business. Candidly, people are more motivated to take action. It's better than a sort of no man's land where there's a status quo and people aren't too bothered about moving things. And I think the other, it's not just that those crises though, they're encouraging people to do things. I think a lot of big businesses are bought into SBTI targets. And suddenly they're in 26, and actually the real big target is coming in 2030, the first big milestone, and suddenly that's not that far away. And so, I think we've got a lot of people driven by SBTI targets as well as the motivation because energy prices have spiked, and suddenly they've been reminded of what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting to see it come through because obviously, it's theorized that in the media and things that this causes a boom. So it's interesting that you've actually seen it.
We do see it. We've seen a massive uptick in the last 6 months, particularly since March, actually. So suddenly there's a lot of interest there, and a lot of. To say in the energy intensive industry sector we're in, a lot of those businesses, energy is obviously a massive component of their total P&L by definition because they're energy intensive. They also operate generally on single digit margins. And so if energy goes up, 20%, 30%, that usually means they're loss making. And so they become competitiveness and survival becomes a key driver. So I guess you're more motivated to do that and to do something about it when you're in that situation, really. So, the corollary is true. If they're energy intensive and we can go in and save them 20, 40% of their energy, they suddenly become more competitive and start winning market share against their competitors. So, there's a driver to do it. It's just strange when you're not under that feel you're not under that pressure. Why they don't do it when the same offering is still out there?
Yeah, and do you think part of the driver to do it as well is to get the photograph of a solar array, into their annual report? Because obviously, that's rather than saying we're buying clean energy from the grid, you can actually see a solar array. You can stand in front of it with a hard hat saying, "This is what we're doing."
I think if I call that tokenism, I've seen less tokenism in the last few years. But the thing that really irritates me is people thinking they've done the job just by buying green energy off the grid. I think fundamentally the whole decarbonisation is actually about real change, not about falsehoods and buying your way through it. And so I'm really just hoping, one of the most proactive things the government could do is say carbon reporting. You can't buy green tariffs anymore and have them count. And I think that would shake a lot more people into action.
Although the grid has decarbonised massively since.
But that's fine. But if the grid has decarbonised, that's great. But if all the corporates suck up all the green energy, all it means is the rest of it is dirty that everybody else was using. So let's level the playing field and just go with the grid emission factor for all electricity and stop buying regos and stop buying all these sort of, pardon my phrase, I won't say the word actually, tariffs. It is. I mean, it really irks me. It's just like people being supercilious just because they're buying green energy, where actually they've done nothing to change their behaviour. And I think they shouldn't. They're in the wrong role if they think they've done their job by doing that.
Yeah. And how is the supply chain for these projects? If you sign a new contract, is it pretty straightforward to get the solar panels or the CHP plant?
Solar, yes. CHP, less so.
And
I think CHP though is CHP is getting consumed by the data center and the Ukraine crisis and things like this. I think there's the lead times are going out. What was 6 to 9 months is now 12 to 15 months. And depending on some certain points of switchgear, you can be into slightly longer periods. We'll see. I mean, I think that could change. There's steps afoot, which I think the government has announced, but I think everybody's forgotten about, and I'm not sure whether we don't know whether it's definitely going to become law. But the industrial competitiveness scheme that's due out is, I think, could change the appetite for certain technologies. And I think one of the losers in that could be CHP.
Right.
It just won't be as economically viable. And the maths we've done suggests neither will it be attractive enough to encourage heat pumps. So it's going to be in an interesting limbo land between action on industrial heat and not doing CHP. So it's going to leave some gaps in the market, which we certainly have some ideas how to fill and how to bring some ideas forward. But we see it changing.
You said earlier on that you tailor each project obviously for each situation, but are the technologies you put in, are they bespoke designs, or is there a certain amount of off the shelf that you can do?
I think most things tend to be bespoke in the way they're implemented. The end of their solar panel is a solar panel. And the question is how many hundreds or thousands of them you're putting onto there. And so the bespoking is around the electrical design and electrical integration to make sure, you're not overwhelming the system or creating fire hazards. CHPs are all bespoke. Every one is bespoke pretty much. I think we're seeing some new technology coming through, which is like a baseload generation, but actually is a standard model, so it's the same module time and time again. So it sort of sits in between the two things, which is a fuel cell.
Yeah.
So we're looking at working with fuel cells to achieve basically the same or better benefits than CHP, but with a modular design. And that's one of the things where the lead time for those is short still. They're in the same timelines as solar panels as opposed to CHPs.
Yeah. So with that fuel cell, would you be generating hydrogen on site or importing hydrogen as a fuel?
Effectively, we're generating it on site, but we're basically using natural gas, but not combusting it. We're using natural gas as a source of hydrogen.
Yeah. But you do lose quite a bit. Fuel cells are not terribly efficient, but
no, it's quite the opposite. They're actually more efficient than engines.
All right.
So they're actually you're talking about 63-64% efficiency against 42.
Yeah.
So you're actually using about a third less gas than you would do in an engine for the same power output. So actually much lower running costs, much cleaner, much more environmentally friendly, and actually much more reliable as well. So
interesting. I'll have to investigate that.
Yeah.
So
happy to do a follow-up on it if you want to.
Absolutely. So obviously we're now emerging from this this most recent fuel crisis, and oil and gas prices have dropped down to the pre-crisis levels. And you say that legislation is going to push people away from CHP and maybe towards solar. But what do you see on the horizon? What's next for you?
Yeah, as I say, I think it's about responding to grid constraints. I think more than anything. I think business is going to be left with plans they can't fulfill because they can't get access to the grid. Every solar array needs to have a G99. Every CHP needs to have a G99. Every fuel cell needs to have a G99.
So you might need to spell G99 out for our listeners.
G99. No, I mean, sorry, it's actually the process. You have to get anything above 4 kilowatts.
Yeah.
You have to apply to the local DNO, really, the network operator, for permission to connect it, basically. And often they'll look at the constraints on their network about whether they can accommodate that additional generation on that site. Particularly in the area of things like CHPs, any mechanical system produces fault basically.
Yeah.
And often the substations down the line have limited capability of dealing with that fault, which means you often can't connect it. But I've seen the same with solar. Actually, you can the inability to connect solar or do any sort of form of generation on particular sites because of the basically the weakness of the local grid.
Yeah.
So I think, again, we're seeing a lot of situations where now the customers wanting to increase their demand, they want to electrify something and they can't, or they can't connect these schemes. So they're basically, hands are tied, unless, for instance, they were to take some or all of the factory potentially off grid, which is something nobody would ever have considered years ago. But actually now we've got a number of our customers considering it seriously.
Right. That would be quite astonishing in many ways, wouldn't it? Going completely off grid, but there's no fallback then. But I suppose there's no standing charges if you're
There's
not.
no standing charges. What's the fallback now if the grid goes off?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. And we've covered an awful lot of ground in this quite short conversation. But what lessons have you learnt in these 17 years of working in clean energy and working through these different financial deals and arrangements?
I think one that I suppose there's probably a couple actually. In reality, we always try to be transparent with our customer because I think if you're transparent, the customer appreciates your openness, your honesty, and understands your logic of how you got to a position more. And I think you build trust that way. And trust remains one of the most important things to do business together. Trust isn't blind. You need to be sort of open to each other's positions, but fundamentally you need to be transparent about issues and rationales and things like this. I think that's one of the main things as well. And I prefer a win-win outcome when you're trying to get into long-term contracts. So it's just our general style. We try to go in with a much more balanced position when we talk to people, and I think some people start with as their opening position. Fairness is probably another thing we try to do. Be fair to everything in terms of everything we do, whether it's our suppliers or our customers, our team, and so on as well. So we try to treat people well, and you find the people treat you well back in return in general.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I think on that note, that just leaves me to thank you very much. I've certainly learned a lot and got some really good insights into the world of sort of behind the meter energy. And it does seem to be something that's rapidly increasing and is going to become more and more normal across the economy. So thank you very much, David, for that.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for your time.